A big obstacle within the Lisp community is the fact that we seem to have too many right-think thinkers, whereas it would be more healthy to stress the diversity that Lisp allows us to have. Common Lisp is an actively multi-paradigm language and allows great ideas and syntaxes from other languages to combine, such as CLAWK. Such flexibility allows people to build powerful support for new paradigms, in many cases going beyond the original designer's intent. OOP plus Meta-Object Protocol is one example. Another example is the system for handling unusual situations like errors. It had deep Multics DNA.
Multics influence. That doesn't ring a bell. What was this?
Under influence of Multics PL/ion symbolic ZLisp.
Wasn't there a page on here somewhere about the social problems of Lisp? One might hope that those could be discussed on the Common Lisp wiki, but the authorship there suffers from all of said problems, so nothing interesting can be said. I was going to write something even ruder here, but decided that, though true, it was uncalled for.
Unfortunately, they are right a disturbingly large percentage of the time. I'm not sure what this implies for the current directions of hard/software.
Sorry, right about what?
Right, that Lisp, and for that matter the Lisp machine, would do it better. Or more concretely, often Lisp had the right answer 20 years ago to a problem that your language, or you, is just realizing is a problem today. Watching a Java programmer get all enthusiastic about garbage collection, never mind all the problems that Java has, 5 years ago was a painful experience for a Lisper. Similar experiences may be had with proponents of Python, Ruby, C++, etc. It is not the language that needs garbage collection. It is the operating system that needs garbage collection. It makes software development much easier and more reliable. At the end of the 70s we had a few machines, Xerox Smalltalk 80, Xerox Interlisp D, MIT Lisp machines, with graphics and integrated environments written in Smalltalk or Lisp. These were mostly object-oriented and interactive. Later people saw these fancy environments and tried to copy them. Unfortunately only the user interfaces got copied, and not the object-oriented and interactive environments. That's one thing that will eventually come back. Machines that are interactively programmable down to the bones. Operating systems and applications that are written in an interactive high-level language like Lisp or Smalltalk. Software that is implemented and extended in the same language. It will happen. But it may take some time. Maybe another 10 years.
Yeah, all that is great, but what is this about Lisp that is so wonderful and powerful and able to leap tall buildings in a single bound? We know it's not faster than a speeding bullet. What is it that Lisp is the right answer to?
Programming.
Please note that glibness is not the same as answering a direct question. Nice try, though. Well, you know, for a Lisper.
You're surprised when a programmer gives an overly literal answer to a terse question? You asked what it was, and the literal answer is programming. You are of course free to ask for a justification of that claim, now that your question has been directly answered.
You said, often Lisp had the right answer 20 years ago to a problem that your language, or you, is just realizing is a problem, today. And what might some of those problems be? On other pages I have asked for specifics. Repeat that here? Guess so.
Like XML or garbage collection?
XML is a problem, then. And garbage collection is a problem, too.
No, silly, they're the answers, representing arbitrary structured data, sexpers. Managing memory resources, GC. Lisp, because of its very minimalist syntax, very powerful macros and very complete set of built-in types becomes extremely good at doing just about anything you can name. In Lisp, because your development cycle is REPL-based, and you can modify an image as it runs with an interactive prompt, your development cycle is entirely different. Lisp users talk about doing things like bottom-up design, and extending the language to meet the problem, meta-languages, and other tricks that sound like vague and overly complex hackery to most other programming language communities. In Lisp, they are not because it's so darn easy to do it. These techniques are powerful, and Lisp makes them easy. Lisp, like extreme programming, is good not just because of any one feature, higher-order functions, Lisp macros, lexical closures, REPL-based development cycle, very good execution speed compared to its peers, etc., but rather because of all of these things synergized to create a beast far greater than the sum of its parts. When the aforementioned glib poster answered programming, they were actually being serious, if rather curt about it.
Lispers insist on splattering code all over this wiki in some vague attempt to win acolytes, one supposes. Code examples do not help to explain how the development cycle is different, which, one presumes, implies improved. As a simple example, what the heck does REPL mean? Lispers are constantly talking about car and CDR and sex, whatever other magic words go along with Lisp, and simply assume that the rest of the community is following along. We are not. If you would like to convince us that Lisp is so superior, you need to explain it in terms of solving specific development problems or speedier design to code cycles, or whatever. Telling me that Lisp is the right answer to programming tells me exactly doodle. Actually, it tells me you can't defend a statement you've made, and are falling back on argument by repeated assertion.
Since you don't want anyone to explain Lisp to you, then perhaps you should make an effort to get off your ass and learn to language yourself instead of rambling on like the stupid whiner that you are. Why does everyone have to spoon-feed the benefits to you, retard?
As far as the crassness of responses to the gushing smugness that Lisp proponents on this wiki display, you'll have to put up with a certain amount of that. It seems to be a rather natural retaliation for the unsupported air of superiority that Lispers carry around here.
The number one reason for that is probably that Lispers have been using higher-order functions since 1959, and most of the rest of the programming world is just barely starting to grudgingly admit that this is a good thing to do. Ignoring higher-order functions, what about garbage collection? Lisp's had that nearly 50 years now too. Of course, it ought to be pointed out that the recent acceptance of such higher-level programming constructs in the mainstream programming community has as much to do with Moore's law and other issues of engineering economics than anything else. For quite a while, it was more cost-effective, at least in the minds of those writing the checks, to throw more programmers at the problem and squeeze out every cycle and bit than it was to have fast CPUs and oodles of memory. The latter were expensive. Nowadays, the economics call for making programmers, and not code, more efficient. Smalltalk language is in the same boat as Lisp. They are languages ahead of their time, doing wonderful stuff, but not practical for many production programming environments available at the time. Smalltalk especially, given its need for snazzy graphics terminals.
Some Lispers forget this, and act as though Lisp has always been the best choice for every conceivable application at any period in its history, and that the rest of us are dimwits for just figuring out that things like higher-order functions can occasionally be useful.
Then there's the incredible hype about O, which Lispers quite justly feel overlooks the fact that Lisp has always had a superset the power of O, even though it didn't get around to fleshing it out as a proper subset until the 1980s, when, note, it became the first standardized language to have O capabilities. More recently there has been incredible hype about XML, and Lispers loudly have said, what's the big deal? That's just a variant on Lisp syntax, which all the non-Lispers said sucked before, but reinvent it with no credit to Lisp, and suddenly it's the greatest thing since sliced bread? What the hell?
So over and over, Lispers feel that Lisp is grossly underappreciated, and that Johnny-come-lately languages and fads and trends keep taking credit for things that properly should be credited to Lisp.
Do not worry about the credit. This constant fretting over Lisp not getting its due is one of the social problems of Lisp, but is in no way, shape, or form restricted to Lisp. C coders reacted with spontaneous surprise when C++ came out, what with its fancy schmancy virtual method, support and all. After all, C coders can do that just fine, and have been, since the age of Unix on the PDP-11 via function pointers. But alas, it's perfectly alright for smug C-weenies to kvetch about this, but as soon as a Lisper does it, oh lordy, look out, ye sky is a Fallon, and an annoyance to many. I know my programming history fairly well, though I have the handicap, I suppose, of being in 1971, so I've never had to deal with punch cards and such. Besides, most of the folks worrying about Lisp getting the credit or not are seeking to bask in reflected glory anyway, like the C coders of years before. I've seen quite a few Lispers worrying about the credit who, like me, were in junior high when Common Lisp was being developed. Kinda like sports fans crowing about their team winning a championship.
What do y'all want, anyway? Do you want to see a big disclaimer pop up every time we fire up our favorite Java IDE saying this language contains technology originally developed in Lisp? Should we put David Moon on the currency?
No, we want that engineers stop bitching about the language and start writing applications and libraries. It seems like a week doesn't go by when some young whippersnapper doesn't come out with some newfangled programming language that is just some ho-hum rehash of something that came before. So predictable. They spend all their time working on tools or productivity enhancements that the applications they could have written in Lisp will wait decades to see the light of day.
Most programmers of any reasonable skill and training are familiar with the contributions made by Lisp.
Not in my experience.
Even if we use something else on a regular basis. If some VBA coder in the IT department has never heard of Lisp, who cares?
We don't. But what it boils down to is simple: if you want to program, learn to program. A mechanic doesn't bitch and moan about his socket sets. An architect doesn't bitch and moan about his pencils. An electrician doesn't bitch and moan about what copper wire goes into the walls. A coder shouldn't have to bitch and moan about the language he codes in. And yet, from our point of view, that's all we hear from you folks. Oh, woe is me, for how are possible thy workings with all those horrid parentheses, the hyphenated symbols, and the verbose character designations? And the speed. Forsooth, it is slow. Lest I not forget that 'tis mere implementation issue. Nay, can't be, 'tis must be universal for all implementations of Lisp. Off with it said. But, such is the fate of evolution, forever reinventing the wheel. Imagine how much farther our knowledge of computer science would be, were we to not ignore our past, but embrace it instead. So Lispers, do not think that your tone of complaining about cars and CDRS being strewn around is particularly amusing. This comes across as just yet another lack of giving proper credit to Lisp. What other widely used languages even claim to have the power of Lisp, after all?
Quite a few of them are getting close. There's not much that can be done in Lisp that cannot also be done in Python, at least without serious green spawning. For example, and Python has the advantage of being far simpler to learn than Common Lisp, and far easier to do trivial stuff in.
But no. People complain about the parenthesis and resolutely ignore the more important issues. Is that a better non-literal answer to your crass question? There's more to it than that, but that's certainly some support for what you claimed was an unsupported position.
No, it isn't. Show us. Act it out. When you prove something to someone, you demonstrate it. Make a video of yourself coding in Lisp, and one coding in another language, or show us one of your applications that just does so many more magical things in Lisp. Prove it. Do it. Demonstrate. Example. Theories don't help. You don't tell people you are going to the moon, you demonstrate it and prove it.
Considering what Lisp has been and done over 40+ years of history, Lisp fanatics have some right to boast. I'm guilty, but proud. I've used Lisp on everything from Lisp machines to DOS. I don't think I should apologize for having this experience and bringing it to bear on various discussions. I would like you to be as excited and interested in Lisp as I am, because I think we will both benefit from more attention paid to Lisp. But moreover, since I'm talking from the experience of Lisp and most of the popular approaches, our discussions would benefit from a common base of understanding. If you and I know X, but you don't know Y, you will not be on equal footing in a debate of X versus Y.
Excuse me, did you say 40 years? Isn't it stretching thing just a little?
Only the very tiniest amount, if at all. It's 2003 now. The first Lisp implementation was begun in 1958. That's right, 1958. The first publications describing that implementation came out in 1960. The Lisp 1.5 Programmer's Manual came out in 1962, and that's when the non-MIT research implementations began. You could quibble about quite which side of 1963 Lisp became real, but it would be quibbling.
Common Lisp, the one Lispers usually point to as the real, production Lisp. Unfortunately, it strikes me as a total relic of the 1970s. Yes, all the useful Lisp ideas are in there, but they are mixed in the clutter of other junk that appears to be the result of compromises made by diverse commercial vendors in the early Reagan years, to support their customers' legacy software from the Nixon and Carter years. Scheme cast off this legacy baggage in the 1970s, but Common Lisp has carried it into the 21st century.
Several companies have brought Common Lisp into the 90s. Apple, Harlequin and Friends were the most prominent. Most newbies don't understand much about the history and why things in Lisp are the way they are. They might only have seen Windows and Linux. Common Lisp has influence of systems that were here before.
Most developers are more interested in the present than the past. Lispers are a notable exception. Lispers will tell you that you have to understand how important certain legacy issues were in 1973. Non-Lispers' natural reaction is, why don't you drop the 30-year-old balls and chains, some of which were dropped 25 years ago by Scheme, and create a new Lisp optimized for today's constraints?
There are several reasons for that. Most people see only the hill on which they are standing. Many people in the Lisp community have seen several hills go up and down. At one point Lisp was widely used in commercial settings, up to the point where Sun, HP, Apple, etc. were selling Lisp systems or reselling them. At that time commercial applications have been developed, and stability of the underlying Lisp suddenly became very important, since you don't want to rewrite a million-line Lisp application every second year that it runs on a changed language. So, stability of the language became important for the commercial users. Lots of stuff that has been done by users with complicated problems and deep pockets. Much of the development for Common Lisp, for example, was driven by the U.S. military. Later it has been tried several times to develop new Lisp platforms, languages, implementations, environments. Just to list a few, Dylan language, for application development by Apple, Lisp, for application delivery by European research institutions, Guile scheme, for system-level scripting, and some more. Often these were taking technology that has been developed in the Lisp community applied to typical current non-Lisp users. Prominent example is Dylan, which was developed so that it should be used by people who at that time were using C++ for application or OS development. Some of these projects went very far, like Dylan, and took a lot of resources. But in the end the result was not the success that was promised/wished. So, as a Lisp user one is bitten by the experience of prior attempts and very conservative. Common Lisp survived as a used language, most of the other attempts not. So the reaction is, let's get Common Lisp more useful and improve it incrementally before starting another large attempt for a new Lisp. My personal feeling is that some of these things are slowly rediscovered, like garbage collection. It will take some while. Quite a long time, I fear. Sometimes it helps to know that things can be different and once were, sometimes it makes people feel uncomfortable. My personal advice, yes, Common Lisp is ugly. We all know that. Get over it. Use it. It is still the best out there.
Well, first, thanks for the advice, seriously, not sarcasm, and I'm taking it. I will use it, but almost certainly as a learning vehicle, not for production.
Thanks for considering it. The advice was meant really honest.
Second, just think about what you're saying. Common Lisp is ugly. We all know that. Get over it. It has been almost unchanged for 20 years. If it has been ugly, and everybody has known it for 20 years, and the best advice is still just get over it, it's the best we have, that's a sorry state for the world's best programming language to be in. If Common Lisp has been stuck this way for this long, I think it's time to retire it, and start over with a new Lisp. I'd do it myself if I could.
God damn it, just go try using Common fucking Lisp, and see for yourself. Stop with the bitching and whining and just write code.